Today, YOB will be reading from Robear and the Reaper by Tim Stegaheis, where a series of metaphysical misadventures leads to a years-long search for the king of the necromancers. Enjoy. Chapter 2. Looking up, he saw lines of crates and bundles with here and there strange pieces of machinery. A warehouse, he concluded to himself. Standing and looking around, he found that they were in a dark and apparently unvisited area lined with wares and supplies of many kinds. The others likewise were looking around and taking stock. Looking down at himself, he discovered that he was dressed in the worn shirt and trousers he had worn when working as a store clerk. "Where is my suit?" he wondered aloud. "This is how you conceived of yourself in the valley, so this is what came to be your physical form," said the scratch in his head. Mama and Torin likewise found themselves in physical forms resembling what they looked like in the office of death. Now being flesh, they were subject to gravity and other physical effects. Ruth and Nobody, however, were completely transformed into shadows. Ruth with a shape like a giant dog or wolf, while Nobody was a slight shadow version of his slender spirit self. "What happened to them?" he inquired in his head. The Scratch's voice answered in their heads. "All of you have new forms in accordance with Death's specifications. You and Mama are Shadow Masters, with some of your previous abilities and some new ones that you will have to learn. Torin has unique light powers vested to her from her religious martyrdom. Now under contract with Death, these will prove to be of special interest in the mission as she learns to use them. Ruth, as you may remember, is now his shadow dog of death. You'll like what she can do. Nobody is now a complete wraith creature, and if he can get past his natural timidity, he could prove to be an excellent complement to Ruth's more aggressive approach to the mission." This was a lot to digest, and the longest response Robear had ever heard from any of the Scratches. "None of you are alive, you know," the Scratch went on. "This will be both an advantage and a liability to you. The prevailing system for detecting and destroying the undead has become very well developed, but as you now work for Death, only total exorcism will end your existence completely. Oh, and you don't want to have your head cut off. You will be recalled and have to do penance for such a failure." "Penance?" he began speaking aloud without realizing it. "Yes, up to a century with some unpleasant company in an unpleasant world, clearing out the spirits after a plague or something." "Okay, let's avoid that then. What are we to do now?" queried Robear. A sound in their heads as of the rustling of paper. "It says that you are to track down a Death Master and return him to Death's office for processing." What is processing?" asked Robear. "Many powerful deities have complained to Death that the activities of this Death Master and will want to have his spirit to torment." "Okay, so what do we do next?" "You're the clever one asking all the questions. You tell us." "Me?" proclaimed Robear. "Him?" growled the shadow dog. "Oh, yeah, right," sneered Mama. "Put the pretty boy in charge. Lose the war before it starts. Mama's got friends. I could get close into this Death Master and make him cry out for his own Mama." "If your friends had vouched for you," replied the Scratch in their heads, "you would not be on this mission now." For the first time, Mama looked sheepish. "Okay, you got me with that. But it always worked with the shadow demons I've been used to." Torin just looked away and said nothing. Nobody, of course, stood silent and waited. Ruth snickered and shook her canine head. "Well," said Robear, unaccustomed to being asked to lead anything, "I guess we'd better find out where we are and how to start getting clues to this Death Master and how to find him." "You guess," interjected Mama. "Boy, if we get this job done before we expire or something, you had best not guess. You had best be figuring things out and tell us what should happen and when, right?" "If we are to get things done and not waste our time here," came back Robear, now feeling a little more confident, "we need to get some knowledge of what we are up against and what we have to work with. So look around and see what information and useful things we can find." Now the shadow creature's usefulness showed itself, as they took no time in learning to float through the expanse of the warehouse and through any objects that intervened. They could not directly affect anything, however, but by conceiving of objects as solid, they could walk on floors or be helped up by stairs. By not thus viewing these structures, they passed through them easily. They were somewhat unnerved when they discovered that the upper floors were currently occupied, but they remained unseen. While some of Robear's shadows were tempted to play with the live people, they obeyed and kept out of sight. Ruth, however, could not resist sneaking up behind a man taking a sip from a whiskey bottle hidden in his desk. She drew the back of one paw up the man's spine and slipped back through the floor as he jumped and spat liquor all over the work he was supposed to be doing. "Did you just open a window?" he demanded of the woman seated behind him. "No," she replied, looking at the bottle still clutched in his hands. Don't you think you've had enough?" "I felt a chill," he replied defensively, and put the bottle back in the drawer. It was Ruth that found the weapons locker, and nobody found several crates of clothing, as well as a closet apparently for workers to keep extra coveralls. The weapons locker at first proved to be an obstacle, but Robear soon learned that he could teleport through a shadow to another shadow, if they were large enough and the space behind was sufficient. He had studied the sword with the gypsies and selected a fine-looking small sword and knife for himself. Mama Nettie duplicated the trick and armed herself with several knives. Torin found a large fire axe for herself. Both Ruth and Nobody discovered that they could not move or lift the weapons, much to the amusement of the Scratch Reapers. They informed the group that the shadows could manifest shadow swords for fighting, but these would only cut spirit. It could be devastating in the long run, but would not stop an enemy like a physical weapon did. Ruth additionally could claw and bite the spirit. Their real powers would have to be discovered by practice. Ruth wondered aloud why a place such as this would need weapons kept on the premises. "Perhaps things are not as peaceful as they seem," speculated Robear. "And perhaps these people upstairs are not as innocent as they seem," countered Ruth. From the stores of clothing, Robear selected a passable nice suit and some coveralls for other needs. Mama packed an extra dress, while Torin argued endlessly with Alina regarding whether or not this was stealing and what she should wear. They settled on an ankle-length dress and petticoats, collared at the throat and wrist with a lacy shawl. Robear felt that if he could get Torin interested in something besides her discomfort, she would be better engaged in the group and its activities. A shriek, followed by a string of curses, drew their attention to Mama, looking at a scrap of newspaper. "Look at the year!" she cried, holding up the paper. "It's dated 1915! 1915? Remarked Robear. "It was 1890 when I died." "I died in 1742, remarked Ruth, with some surprise. "At least I think it was 1742. "I don't know what year it was," whispered Nobody. "It was 1807 when Madame Lucille and I had our little disagreement," stated Mama. "How we get all the way up here in 1915? "Point of death is irrelevant," stated Robear Scratch. "Although custom dictates not going backwards, death selected a time of return according to other advantages. Also, because we have been sent to an English-speaking territory, you all now speak and understand that language. Death has tried to make the transition easy on you." "What is this? Virginia State's Protectorate? What happened to the Republic of Virginia?" inquired Robear, looking at another scrap of paper. The answer came from one of Mama's shadows. "I see the Holy Roman Empire marching on Richmond during a time of local emergency, proclaiming that they were helping. They bargained with the beleaguered government to come under the protection of Rome. Virginia will soon be just another territory of the Roman Empire." "Politics is no longer your concern," interrupted Robear Scratch. "Death takes no interest in these small events, and neither should you." "Small events!" exclaimed Robear. "How could the takeover of my native land by the Roman Empire be a small event?" "Because empires from Atlantis to Persia to Inca come and go, but death remains the same," said his Scratch Reaper. Soon they were looking out a grimy window at the narrow, dirty streets and another warehouse on the other side. After some trial and error, the shadow creatures also learned to pass through the plentiful shadows and over to the other warehouse. Torrin, unfortunately, would have to walk over in plain sight. This was when Robear discovered that he could manifest lockpicks from the ends of his fingers. With a little practice, he had all the doors on the ground floor under his control. Robear and Mama shadow passed over to the other warehouse and unlocked the ground floor. They observed that what foot travel could be seen was furtive and sparse, but day and night many blimps were passing overhead. Of them all, only Robear had seen blimps before. They were how a few wealthy and adventurous types used to travel in his day. The amount of air travel seemed to indicate that either all the people were wealthy, or virtually everyone was traveling by blimp now. Mama had a difficult time getting used to the blimps, so much like demons to her unaccustomed eyes. Torrin and Ruth just ignored them, and nobody added them to his list of many things to be afraid of. They searched the other warehouse and found a stash of money and luggage they could use. Unlike the first warehouse, this one was currently unoccupied, save for a snoozing guards. Scouting the building further, they located the roof-mounted blimp stop and made their plans to ride the blimp out to the edge of town and look for a means of getting information and such supplies as they would need. "What supplies do we need?" Mama said in his head. "We're dead." Robear pointed out that they could use the power and resources generated by a ritual. Mama was more inclined to make potions and signs, but a ritual could be performed by both of them and give a great deal more energy. So they agreed to pursue that. "Chickens," Mama said. "We need some chickens to perform a really good ritual." "Chickens," Robear repeated amazed. "You really are old school, but if we find some, I guess we can use them." Several items that could be used were located and packed into a small satchel. The problem, of course, was the shadows. In full daylight, they would stick out as being out-of-place shadows. So they reluctantly agreed to be packed into suitcases. They had no weight, and Ruth found that she could alter her size down to that of a very small dog. Nobody would not complain, but could not have been very comfortable doubled over in a large suitcase. Another suitcase held their weapons. Now ready, they went up to the roof. The blimp stop was an elevated platform with a small shelter nearby for waiting on the next blimp. Robear read the posted schedule and reported that the second blimp due would take them to the north edge of town in the wealthy district. The wait was made long by the worry over being discovered, but soon enough they were boarding a moderate-sized blimp and found that the money they had appropriated would go a long way, but only because they needed no personal supplies. Soon enough they would need more. Robear paid for himself, his wife, his maid, and luggage. To the conductor's raised eyebrow, Robear answered, "Wrong stop. We need to get to my Aunt Carol's place." None of them talked during the long trip. However, they overheard several rumors and gleaned bits of information from the conversations of others. Two men were debating the role of the Roman Empire in as Virginia's protector, and Robear found this particularly interesting. A young couple had recently returned from the Caribbean islands and were reminiscing about it as Mama listened in. Finally, they reached the end of the line and quickly ducked away to a nearby park to plan their next move. While on the blimp, Robear had acquired a map, and they studied it. They chose a likely road which they hoped would lead to rural areas where they might find an abandoned house or barn. Fortunately, the residents of this neighborhood tended to use private blimps and paid little attention to the street traffic. They passed through without incident and were soon strolling gravel roads through the countryside. About an hour and a half later, they found an ancient farmhouse which proved to be empty. Ruth emerged from her suitcase wordlessly and retreated to the back porch. She was not interested in much until she spotted a few feral chickens scratching in the overgrown garden. A bit like the hound she now resembled, she gave chase. Most of the chickens bolted, but several immediately died of fright. Flippantly, Ruth returned to the house and informed them, "You wanted chickens? You've got chickens, freshly killed in the garden. I cannot pick them up, so you'll have to gather them yourself." Ruth then settled near the old fireplace, refusing to participate with the scouting of the house or setting up the ritual. Nobody proved to be in a better mood and scouted the house thoroughly. Robear elected to not agitate Ruth by telling her that dead chickens were of no use to them. He did manage to capture one ancient hen and brought it to Mama. They had just gotten set up without having started when there came a knock on the front door. Torrin was in the living room and so answered the door while Robear joined her after a moment. It was the police. They were canvassing the area on a mission looking for a missing psychologist and passing out pictures. Robear thanked them and subtly encouraged them to leave before they noticed that the house was unfurnished. He then rejoined Mama to engage in the planned ritual, while Torrin walked outside to avoid any knowledge of the ritual, as Alina was already being a pain in the ear just from hearing about it. Robear and Mama Nettie performed the classic ritual for drawing power to themselves, as well as protection. This also resulted in their magical awareness being sensitized. It was a good thing, too, as they immediately became aware of a magical detective bearing down on them.